My name is Helen. I am 62 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what family meant. I raised two children on my own after my husband passed, and I carried every bill, every late night worry, and every sacrifice on my shoulders. That is why the moment I asked my daughter what time her engagement dinner was, and she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Oh, Mom, we already had it yesterday," something inside me cracked. At first, I thought I had misheard her. I remember standing in my kitchen, the morning sun slanting through the blinds, coffee still steaming in my mug. My heart stuttered like I'd missed a step on the stairs. She said it so casually, like it was a detail I had simply forgotten to check. But I hadn't forgotten. No one had told me. My daughter, the little girl whose scraped knees I once kissed, had chosen to celebrate the beginning of her new life without even letting me sit at the table. That same morning, still reeling, I opened my credit card account online, looking for the comfort of the numbers I knew. Instead, I saw a charge that turned my stomach cold. Over $17,000, gone in a single swipe. The vendor's name was a local event space, one I knew she and her fiancé had toured. My hands trembled on the keyboard. It wasn't an error. It was their wedding bill. Paid with my card, without my permission. I remember whispering out loud, though the house was empty. She didn't. The sound of my own voice startled me. My son was asleep upstairs, though asleep was a generous word for a 34-year-old man who hadn't held a job in years. His girlfriend had made herself comfortable in my living room, as if my house were a motel that happened to provide groceries. And now my daughter had drained me too. It was like waking up from a long dream. In one morning, I realized that I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I was a resource, a card to swipe, a roof to squat under. The betrayal burned, sharper than grief. And all I could think was, if this is what family has become, what will I have left for myself? That night, after the shock of the dinner and the $17,000 had settled like a stone in my chest, I walked slowly through my house. The walls seemed smaller, almost pressing in on me. From the living room came the sound of Lydia's laughter, sharp, careless, as she flipped through channels on my television. A half-empty soda can sat sweating on the arm of my couch, and one of my throw blankets was balled up on the floor. My son Ethan was sprawled beside her, controller in his hand, his face lit by the glow of the screen. Neither of them noticed me standing there, or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. I went into the kitchen, hoping to find calm in the familiar. Instead, I was greeted by dirty dishes piled in the sink, a pan crusted with the remains of something Lydia had cooked, and a grocery receipt shoved into the corner. I knew it was mine. I was the one who had paid. My hands traced the edge of the countertop as if holding on to something solid could keep me from shaking. This was my home. Yet everywhere I turned, felt borrowed, invaded. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Clara lit the screen. "Mom, the florist asked for another deposit. Just cover it. I'll pay you back later." There wasn't an ounce of apology, not even acknowledgement of the $17,000 already gone. My chest tightened. I could almost hear her voice, brisk and impatient, as if my only role was to approve the next expense. I stared at the message until the words blurred. The kitchen around me smelled faintly of onions and old coffee. Upstairs, Ethan's footsteps thundered toward the fridge, and I heard him rummaging without a thought of asking. Lydia called after him with a laugh that grated against my nerves. It struck me then. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a place where everyone else lived freely, while I financed the comfort. My presence had become optional. My silence had been mistaken for consent. I set my phone down on the counter, screen still glowing. The weight of that message, the laughter from the living room, the memory of Clara's casual dismissal, it all pressed down until something inside me whispered, "You are disappearing in your own life." And in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep fading quietly. Something had to change. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, staring at the clock on the wall as though the steady tick might anchor me. The house was silent for once. Ethan and Lydia had gone out late and were still sleeping off whatever party they'd attended. Sunlight poured through the blinds, but it felt harsh, exposing every corner of my exhaustion. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account again, hoping the charge had somehow been reversed overnight. It hadn't. $17,000 sat there, glaring back at me, mocking my years of discipline and sacrifice. My finger hovered over the phone. I wanted to call Clara, to demand an explanation, to shout at her the way I never had when she was younger, but I already knew how she would respond. Smooth, confident, telling me I was overreacting, that it was all for her big day, that she'd pay me back eventually. I could almost hear the edge of irritation in her voice, as if I were the one ruining things by daring to object. The very thought twisted in my gut. A door slammed upstairs. Ethan stumbled down the hall, yawning loudly. "What's for breakfast?" he called, as though I were still the mother who used to pack his lunches and leave notes in his backpack. I didn't answer. He clomped into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and frowned. "You need to get more orange juice." Not we. Not I'll pick some up. Just another demand, layered on top of everything else. I studied his unshaven face, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he carried himself like a permanent guest. My son was a grown man, but he acted like a boy who had never left home. Lydia trailed in behind him, wearing one of his old t-shirts, humming as she grabbed the remote from the counter. She didn't even greet me. She might as well have been the lady of the house. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Clara. "Don't stress, Mom. Just handle it, okay?" I read it twice, the casual dismissal burning into me. Something inside me hardened. The children I had sacrificed everything for no longer saw me as a mother. I was a service, a card to swipe, a kitchen stocked with groceries. I closed the laptop with a firm snap. My pulse raced, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was from resolve. This cycle was ending, and I would be the one to end it. That afternoon, I drove into town, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have. The bank's glass doors reflected the sunlight, and for a moment I saw myself there, small, tired but determined. I walked inside, explained the unauthorized charge, and felt my throat tighten as I spoke the words. $17,000. Saying it aloud made it heavier. The teller's eyebrows lifted, and she guided me into a private office. Within minutes, the account was frozen. My card would no longer be a bottomless well for anyone else to dip into. When I left the bank, my knees shook, but not from weakness. It was the first real step I had taken for myself in years. I drove straight to the locksmith next, ignoring the buzzing of my phone in my purse. Ethan's name lit up the screen, followed by Clara's. I didn't answer. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a new set of locks jingled in a paper bag beside me. I carried them inside like they were trophies. The workman came the next morning. Ethan stumbled out of his room, bleary-eyed, and asked what was going on. I told him plainly, "I'm changing the locks." His mouth opened, ready to protest, but something in my expression must have stopped him. He grumbled, retreated to his room, and slammed the door. Lydia didn't even come out. As the locksmith turned the final screw, I felt a strange rush of relief. I watched the old brass knob come off and the new one gleam in its place. It was a simple thing, metal and mechanics, yet it carried the weight of a declaration. This was my house, and it would no longer be theirs to control. That evening, I sat at the table with a notepad. I wrote down what had to be done next. Call an attorney, revise my will, set boundaries that couldn't be erased with pleading texts or slammed doors. The phone buzzed again, messages piling up, but I ignored them. When the last call went unanswered, I looked out my window at the garden, overgrown but waiting. For the first time in years, I believed I could bring it back to life. Something had shifted. The locks had changed, but so had I. The following week, I sat in a leather chair across from a lawyer whose office smelled faintly of old books and coffee. His name was Mr. Whitman, gray-haired and calm, the kind of man who had seen every variety of family dispute. I laid out the story, my voice steady even as my hands twisted in my lap. When I reached the part about my daughter's charge, his eyes sharpened. When I described the threats, the laughter in my house, and the way my son drifted like a shadow that refused to leave. He nodded as though none of it surprised him. He explained my options in clear terms. I could dispute the charge with the credit card company, and with the locks already changed, I had the right to decide who lived in my home. More importantly, he urged me to update my will. I had left everything to Ethan and Clara by default, a decision I'd made years earlier when I still believed unconditional love meant unconditional trust. Mr. Whitman suggested shifting my assets into a trust that would support local scholarships and community programs. If my children wanted to inherit anything, it would come only under strict conditions. The idea stung, but it also freed me. For the first time, I considered the possibility that my legacy could extend beyond the walls of my fractured family. Signing those papers felt like pressing a reset button on my future. My hand shook as I wrote my name, but not from fear. This was strength in motion. Before I left, he handed me a folder thick with documents. "If they harass you," he said, "call the police. You have every right to your peace." His words settled over me like a shield. I stepped back into the sunlight, clutching that folder, aware that my children would see it as betrayal, but knowing it was survival. That evening, I placed the papers in my desk drawer, right on top where no one could miss them. Ethan banged around upstairs, and Clara's name lit my phone with another unanswered call. I traced the edge of the folder and whispered to myself, "I will not be erased." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The phone began ringing before sunrise, the kind of shrill tone that made the silence in the house feel brittle. I ignored the first call, then the second. By the fifth, I set the phone face down on the counter, but it kept buzzing across the surface like an angry insect. Clara's name appeared again and again, her messages lighting up the screen in rapid bursts. "Mom, answer me. We need to talk. You can't just cut me out like this." Then another, "If you don't help, we'll have no choice but to get legal involved. Don't make us declare you unfit." The words pierced deeper than I expected. Unfit. As though the decades of holding two jobs, paying mortgages, and raising children alone counted for nothing. I sank into a chair, pressing my palms against my temples, hearing echoes of Clara's childhood voice, her laughter in the yard, her whispered, "Thank you, Mommy," after a bedtime story. That little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who saw me as a hurdle to be pushed aside. Upstairs, Ethan thudded down the hall and shouted, "What's with all the drama? Clara says you've lost it." He appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up, his expression somewhere between annoyance and pity. You should just give her the money, Mom. It'll be easier. His words dripped with the same entitlement that had drained me for years. I rose slowly, meeting his gaze. My voice was calm, almost too calm. No, Ethan, it won't be easier. Not anymore. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and retreated to his room. The slam of his door rattled the frame, but I stood steady. The phone kept buzzing until the battery finally gave out, leaving the kitchen in a heavy silence. I looked around at the clutter, the dirty glasses abandoned on the counter, the life I had allowed to spiral beyond recognition. A quiet resolve spread through me. If my children wanted to brand me as unfit, then they would have to face the truth of who I had become, stronger, not weaker. I picked up the dead phone, set it aside, and whispered to the empty room, "You will not break me." And in the stillness that followed, I believed every word. 2 days later, as I was trimming the rose bushes in the front yard, a voice called across the fence. "Need a hand with those?" I looked up to see Marjorie, the new neighbor who had moved in 3 months earlier. She was about my age, with quick eyes and a casserole dish balanced in her hands. She stepped closer, smiling in a way that didn't ask for anything. "I made too much lasagna," she said, lifting the foil-covered dish. "Figured you might like a warm meal." The kindness startled me. I invited her in, and soon we sat at my kitchen table, the smell of baked cheese filling the air. Somehow the story spilled out of me. The dinner I wasn't invited to, the money drained from my account, the endless phone calls. Marjorie listened without interruption, nodding slowly, her expression soft but steady. When I finished, she reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "My son did the same," she confessed quietly. "Different details, same kind of wound. Took me years to realize love doesn't mean surrender. You're not alone in this." Her words landed like water on dry ground. For the first time in weeks, I felt the sharp edges of my fear soften. We ate together, and in the small comfort of shared stories, the house felt less hollow. Later that evening, a knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find Michael, Clara's fiancé. His shoulders slumped, and a folded envelope in his hand. He looked nothing like the bright-eyed young man who had come around for holidays. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Grant," he began. "I didn't know Clara used your card. I should have stopped it. The wedding, it's off." He held out the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $8,500, his share of the cost. I stared at the paper, my throat tight. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "It was the right thing." As he left, I stood in the doorway, the envelope heavy in my hand. Between Marjorie's casserole and Michael's honesty, I realized something crucial. Family could also be found in respect and in integrity, not just in blood, and for the first time, I felt less like a victim and more like a woman beginning again. It was just past dusk when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me. Most evenings were quiet now. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. When I opened the door, Clara stood on the porch, her eyes swollen, makeup streaked down her cheeks. She clutched a duffel bag as though she'd been walking for miles. "Mom," she whispered, voice raw, "please, let me stay here tonight. Michael's gone. He called everything off. I don't have anywhere else." Her words tumbled over themselves, desperate and uneven. For a moment, my heart clenched. I saw the little girl she once was, the child who used to curl against me during thunderstorms, who asked me to braid her hair before school. The urge to pull her into my arms was almost overwhelming. But then I remembered the $17,000, the dinner I hadn't been invited to, the threats, the text that treated me like a credit line rather than a mother. "Clara," I said softly, "I can't let you move back in." Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "Please, Mom, just until I figure things out. I promise I'll change. I promise I'll be different." Tears burned in my eyes, but I held my ground. "You are my daughter, and I love you," I told her, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "But love doesn't mean I erase myself for you. This house is no longer a place where people take without respect. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on honesty, not dependence." She shook her head, backing a step away, as though the words had struck her physically. "So you're really shutting the door on me?" I swallowed hard. "No. I'm leaving the door open for the daughter who treats me as a person, not a resource. That's the only version of you I can welcome." Her sob broke the evening air. She turned and walked down the steps, the sound of her bag dragging along the concrete. I stood in the doorway long after she disappeared into the dark, the weight of what I'd done pressing down, and yet, beneath the sorrow, a fragile, unshakable strength. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, like the house itself was exhaling after years of tension, with Ethan gone more often, slinking back only to gather his things, and Clara silent since that night on the porch. I finally heard the hum of my own thoughts again. It was not loneliness. It was relief. I started small. I opened the windows wide, letting in the cool spring air, and scrubbed the kitchen until the counters gleamed. The scent of lemon cleaner and roses from the garden mingled, reminding me that even in broken places, beauty could return. I spent afternoons in the yard, pruning, planting, coaxing life from the soil. Watching the roses bloom again was like watching myself rise from a long winter. Marjorie became a steady presence. She'd knock on the door with muffins, or wave me over to sit with her on her porch. We shared stories, some funny, some sad, and with every conversation, I felt less like the woman who had been erased in her own home, and more like someone worth listening to. She even convinced me to sign up for a few volunteer shifts at the library. The first day I shelved books beside teenagers chattering about exams, I realized my life could hold new beginnings, even at 62. Sometimes at night, I would catch myself thinking of Clara and Ethan. A part of me still ached for them, still wished they would come back not in desperation, but in respect. Yet I no longer waited for it as though my happiness depended on their choices. I had drawn my line. Whether they crossed it was up to them. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the roses glowing in the fading sun. The air was warm, and for the first time in years, I felt peace settle into my bones. I thought of all I had nearly lost, my savings, my home, my sense of self, and of what I had gained, clarity, dignity, the courage to say no. As the light dimmed and fireflies began to dance in the yard, I whispered into the quiet, "This is my life, and it is finally mine again." And in that moment, I knew the strongest legacy I could leave wasn't money or property. It was the unshakable truth that self-respect is worth everything,